Deep in the Sahara lies this tomb. Around it are the last remains of 300 generations of Mozabites. Baba Amour is a leader of the Mozabite race, a people who have been in exile for 10 centuries, a people who have never married outside, and so nowadays a short-sighted moonface means inevitably Mozabite. As the French settled along the North African coast, the Mozabites ventured at first shyly out of their desert retreat. They moved in to fill a gap and they prospered. They came to Algiers, 400 miles north of their date palms and wells, to supply canned provisions for the Europeans. They rapidly gained a virtual monopoly in the grocery business throughout North Africa. Behind those tins and jars, they live simply on traditional food, and yet they stock peanut butter, marmalade, or anything else if there's a market for it. The Mozabite women never see these steel and concrete boxes. The men take turns running the shops, but the business is always controlled by the elders back in the desert. The decisions to buy and sell shops, the accounts and the profits, are all referred back to their own main town, far from westernized Algiers. The desert grocers prospered with the French, but as the French returned to France, so the Mozabites are gradually selling up and leaving the cities. An English journalist, David Willey, wanted to delve into their desert life. He wanted to get away from his hot, sweaty office to look for a dream, his dream of the desert. His supplies naturally came from a Mozabite grocer.
Oui. Vous êtes de Gardaïa vous-même? Oui, je suis de Gardaïa, oui. Très bien. Vous voulez faire un bon petit voyage là-bas? C'est ça. Ça vous intéresse? Beaucoup. Je voudrais aussi une boîte de lait concentré, sucré, s'il vous plaît. Une boîte, hein? Une boîte. Voilà. À part ça, c'est tout, merci. C'est combien, s'il vous plaît? 120 et 130, ça fait...
A good road stretches south from Algiers to serve the oil fields of the Sahara. Once it ran all the way to the Cape, but now in places the desert is beginning to take over again. David Willey had heard stories of the secret people before he left Algiers, but he'd have to wait until he reached the Mozabites' main town, Gardaïa, for the whole story. Would their way of life match his dream? In the 11th century, the Mozabites were driven over these Atlas mountains and out into the desert. Within 40 years, they had built 5 towns and established oases to be completely cut off and self-sufficient, to live their lives free from any outside interference. No Mozabite woman ever leaves her desert town. And from the age of 11, many never leave their houses, and their veils are never taken off. The 5 Mozabite towns lie within 6 miles of each other. David Willey would make his base in the largest, Gardaïa. The towns are all similar in design, with a mosque in the middle. And from the road, 4 towns can be seen. Bonura in the background, and to the left Beni Yezguen in front of Malika, with Gardaïa furthest away. Every Friday in Gardaïa is market day. It's the only day when outsiders are welcomed. Nomads come in from all over the northern Sahara to fill their larders or trade in their transport. His first impression was of noisy chaos, baffling in its confusion. A melee of Malachites, once black slaves, Mozabites and assorted desert nomads. Incredible noise. Nobody listened, everybody shouted. A crowd of old men and children. All the women were locked away and the young men were at their tills in the city grocer's shops. You can buy a camel here or a sheep. You'd probably not be able to buy a slave, not these days. The black Haratans were once the Mozabite slaves, but centuries ago they accepted the Mozabite religion and were given more freedom. The two peoples will probably never intermarry, and this may be the downfall of that desert community. The Mozabites are too inbred, easy to recognize, as distinctive as a desert donkey. But they paid for their closed way of life. Inbreeding has made them chronically short-sighted. Behind these blank walls, David Willey knew there was a life no intruder would ever see. Veiled women, cool fountains, a private Arabian Nights perhaps, or maybe a sweatshop carpet industry full of Western promise for the thrifty husbands. The minaret points from the dusty desert towards paradise. In the mosque, Baba Amour is at prayer. The Mozabites are a puritanical sect of Mohammedans, driven out of Tiaret 1,000 years ago for their beliefs. Now religion ties them to the desert, to the graves of their ancestors. Their dead are almost more important than the living. To overlook the roof of a Mozabite house is to invite hatred. The walls are built up so that the women can take the air and yet still remain out of sight. The most important function of a wife is to bear male children, and their most sacred duty is to look after the graves of their fathers and forefathers. A Mozabite graveyard can cover several acres, and the whole area will be littered with earthenware. The richer the dead man, the more pots are left on his grave. Here and there, the tombs of holy men, made like their houses from mud, painted and strengthened with palms. This mosque, now disused, was built 7 centuries ago. Its mud walls baked as hard as rock by the passage of 250,000 suns. From the mosque, David Willey could see in the middle of the graveyard the assembly square. It is here that religious justice is seen to be done. Only the Mozabites can congregate here. Certain men, usually the richer ones because they live in certain houses, are bound by custom to bring meals of couscous to the meeting. This will be distributed to the poorer, for not every Mozabite has a shop in Algiers. They come in small parties all morning. They will leave just before sunset. Every Mozabite is expected to come once a week, and if they are away from the desert, then they must return once a year. When he dies, no Mozabite would wish to be buried away from this holy place. In the square, groups gather round to hear readings from the Quran. They hold their courts of justice and meetings of the elders. And suddenly, at sunset, they hurry back to their houses, the meals of couscous now on different heads. Once every year, the young, fit Mozabites are summoned back from their shop counters in Algiers to spend 2 months in their towns by the graves of their families. It's during these celebrations that they're all required to work for the community. The gunshot is a signal that the workers are about to set off. The most common type of work is conserving water by one means or another. everyone's accounted for, the Pied Piper leads his troop out towards the oasis. Whatever the work, it's often the band who have most to do, as music is required all the way there, throughout the operation, and then all the way back home again. The heat is deafening, the dusty air is blinding, and water alone can bring relief. But it scarcely rains more than once in 10 years, and all that digging is more of a prayer than a promise of fulfillment. One day, all this shouting and dancing may produce dams and reservoirs, but the traditional methods seem to be more effective. To tap the natural reserves of water, wells must be about 200 feet deep. Their fathers and forefathers dug these wells to give the Mozabites, after the passage of centuries, the lushest and most profitable date palms of the Sahara. But date palms need more than just water. They need a gardener. This man, whose ancestors were slaves, works for one family and his job is to look after their dates. It's springtime and he climbs each female tree to pollinate it with a spray of male flowers. He invokes Allah's blessing on each tree to ensure a successful fertilization. David Willey heard him at work, and the operation was explained, and no doubt understood.
شتاين بتاسجد ها ونشتاين هذا يكون زوامو جدا سام نعم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا نبينا صلى الله عليه وسلم.
How can an outsider, an infidel, really understand a people such as these? This is the holy city of Beni Isgen, a closed city after dark, and then the gates are barred to any but the faithful. Still, during the day, amusing to the outsider, for then Greek meets Greek, or rather Mozabite, when they try to sell to each other.
000.
Et augmenté.
Augmenté.
Oui.
Mais les prix ici, ça monte.
C'est cher.
Oh,
Oui.
c'est trop cher. Non 9 000.
9 000, oui.
Oh non, c'est trop cher. C'est trop cher. Merci.
It must be heartbreaking when you can't even flog a carpet to a foreigner. As the sun starts to sink in the west, the pattering of 1,000 hooves is heard approaching the city. Under the care of 1 or 2 community goat herds, all the animals come home for the night, and then something strange happens. Once the goats have passed through this arch, the herdsman can knock off. Every animal knows his own house and will go there without guidance. The only other thing is that there must be someone to open the door. As soon as all the goats are inside the city walls, a thorough check is carried out to make sure that any foreigners or outsiders are beyond the gate. David tried to remain, but failed. Just as Beni Isgen shut for the night, at Gardaya, more tolerant and only a stone's throw away, the fun is about to begin. If David Willey had expected all the mysteries of the East with harems and belly dancers, he'd come to the wrong place. But what he was about to see was in many ways even more fascinating. The black Haratans, slaves and descendants of slaves, would be enslaved again, but this time by their own music. The rhythms come from places far to the south of the Sahara, far from the desiccated desert. They rock with the beat of the fetid jungle. David joined the spectators. The Mozabites themselves are somewhat scornful and above this sort of thing. But the Haratans are searching for release, not now from slavery, but from themselves. eyes are glazed. The mind is going into a state of trance. Sunset to midnight, they were gradually working up to a climax, and it was early morning when David Willey witnessed these men so far gone into trance that one rolled back and forth through the flames. Belly dancers can be seen in London nightclubs, but here he'd seen a performance unique to the desert, to the place where black and white Africa meet, where a piece of the jungle has been uprooted to flourish still among the sand dunes of the Sahara.